So I'm Jacqui Leggetter. I'm Head of Integration at the Department of Work and Pensions. So thanks for coming and listening to me today. How do I follow some of the great speakers that you've had yesterday and today? So I'm going to talk about how we've been using APIs in DWP to transform the citizen experience. Now, a lot of the conversations today have been around banking and finance, so what's that got to do with DWP? So we're the largest UK government department, and it might surprise you to know that we pay over 23 million UK citizens benefits. That's about 23%, 24% of GDP is paid through DWP. We pay benefits at some point to almost every household in the UK. We cover cradle to grave, so from children who are living in low-income families all the way through working age, retirement and bereavement. We issue in the region of £200 billion worth of payments every year, so every day out of DWP we're releasing about £1 billion worth of payments into the banking systems. We have around 84,000 employees. Currently it's a little bit higher than that. We've got about 110,000 because we had to increase as a result of the pandemic. So what does a customer journey look like in DWP? It's like most large organisations, it's a bit fragmented at the minute. It's not a great customer experience. So customers at the minute are dealt with in silos. So they can approach us either through online channels, through telephony, or even still using paper. And depending on the functional line that they're interacting with will determine how they interact with us. It can be quite frustrating because we do have quite an overlap in some of the benefits. Similar to in the banking, through my banking I may have my savings account, my day-to-day account, my bills account and perhaps my mortgage. And when these things aren't joined up, it can be pretty frustrating as a user of those services. It can cause frustration, it can cause delays in decision making, and it can also mean that you're having to provide the same information more than once, so filling in multiple forms. I had a call just the other week from my house insurance company asking me about my current address, and I'm like, I've insured this address for the last 10 years. She says, oh yes, it's just not been changed on this system. It's up to date on our other systems. Go figure. Frustration. Certainly in DWP, that can also lead to fraud, error, and a significant amount of cost on rework. So transforming our services, what we want to do is give citizens a seamless experience. We want citizens to engage with us through a single front end. We want to point people at our online channels. We want people to self-serve through the systems. And we want that to be so simple that anyone can do it. We've started that already within our retirement pension journey. It was a little bit of a risk for us because when we first started, we thought, are state pensioners really the demographic that are digitally enabled, that will be able to use online services? Through lots of user research and creating services that are really simple to use, we've been able to divert roughly about 97–98% of new claims through our online services. So what we're doing now is we're breaking down those data silos. We're breaking in and breaking across those monolithic legacy systems. So we're building what we call bridges. We have a platform called our Legacy Bridge, where we're able to expose some of the data that sits in our legacy infrastructure as a RESTful API so that the new world products can consume the data that's sitting in the legacy systems. And on the back of that, we're also building lots of new systems that comply with the new microservice API event-driven architecture. So enabling that old world and new world to talk to each other is a bit of a game changer in terms of maximizing the use of the data that you already hold while you're going through that transformation. So for us, what we want is common channels for citizens to use the channel that they want to use. We also want to share information that improves their journey, that makes it feel more joined up and seamless for them. And we want our staff to have a better experience. So at the minute, we have an awful lot of handoffs when citizens call in for help. They can help with one element of the call, but then have to hand it off to another team to deal with the rest of it, which can be frustrating for staff as well as for the customer. And what we want to do is that straight-through process automation. The DWP isn't really here to pay out money. We're here to support people have productive lives. So if you're of working age, if you have a disability, we want to make sure that we can give adaptations and any support that you need to help you be self-sufficient in work. And certainly we want to get as many people in the workplace as we can, because that's what helps the economy. And for our state pensioners, we want them to live comfortably and independently. So our new architecture looks a little bit like this. We've got 4 layers within the architecture. That orangey zone at the top is our interaction layer. So that's our external facing user interaction layer. And we want our citizens and our staff to have the same experience, so have the same look and feel to the systems. The blue zone is our business specific. So that's our rules engine of the organisation. There's some data that is not common across our service lines. And those specific rules for pension, for example, vary hugely from rules for maternity allowance. So there's no commonality in those components. The green zone is the interesting zone, because this is where all of our common componentry is being built. And this is where we're starting to chip away at some of the legacy through building those microservices for the common services. So building out things like address, biometric data, where you, what type of address you live in, bank account details, those sorts of things that are common across all of the service lines. Our third-party services are in the pink zone, so that's things like the Experian credit check, the postcode checker to ensure that addresses are valid. And what underpins this new architecture and this data sharing ecosystem is a series of open APIs. So building our APIs at a granular enough level that we're building reusable services, and we're building come and get APIs and also process do APIs, and interlocking our API infrastructure with our event infrastructure. So our API-led design, our best practice, we kind of have 3 layers in our API. Some of you may have seen this sort of pyramid before, and I think Luke Andrews had a diagram pretty similar to this earlier. We think about all of our source systems, whether that's a new microservice that you've built or your legacy system, a lot of where your core data is held, and how you can expose that at a granular level. That's where we get most reuse, because if we expose an API that does one thing, so it tells you an address, and you don't put any business rules or anything into that API, you get maximum reuse from that API. But then we come into what we call technical agility. And that technical agility is about us being able to have APIs collaborate with each other and be able to produce a service API. So for example, if I want to validate a citizen, I might call a name, an address, a date of birth, and some other identifying factor. That might be validate a citizen API, and under the hood, it will call maybe 4 or 5 different source APIs, depending on the level of verification that I want. But I get maximum reuse across some of those common processes. Limited reuse at the tip of the pyramid. So the business focus APIs. There is some reuse. So for example, if I quote state pensions, state pension, if they make an award of pension and they know how much that pension is, someone else might be interested in how much that pension is that's in payment. So if we want to say, for example, offer out a social broadband tariff to telecoms companies, we can use those business APIs and expose them to do benefit checks and check benefit amounts, etc. So it doesn't mean we don't get any reuse of them. It just means the reuse is more limited use cases. So we think about in DWP, we're an organisation, a digital organisation of around 5,000 digital experts. We have in the region of about 2,000 dedicated engineers, plus we supplement our permanent staffing with supplier partners. So when we think about who needs to know about APIs, we talk an awful lot about the engineering community, but actually it's much more than the engineers that need to know about APIs, because in terms of driving up reuse and in terms of speed to delivery, it's your business analyst, your architects, and your delivery managers that's really going to drive that speed. If you're building a new service, we've all been at the days where we've got a new requirement, and we stand in front of a blank whiteboard and we draw it from scratch, and then we go and build it. We don't have to do that anymore. We can identify through our business analysis and through our delivery managers, we're delivering a new service. My first go-to place is find out what's already there, go and find what APIs exist that I can tap into. It will not meet my whole requirement, but even if it meets 50, 60, 70%, I can build the rest. So we're building for the gaps rather than for building for the whole amount. So it was really key for us as we talked about our user research in terms of our API platform to the business analysts, product owners, delivery managers, and our engineering community. And we came up with our API exchange. That incorporates our gateway and our portal, and we bought an enterprise product to do that. We've configured all of our APIs through it, and what we have is our API team act as the center of an ecosystem. So every team across digital is building through API first. Every single team that's building services are building services with data sharing and reuse in mind. And what they do is they come to the API exchange and they'll find all sorts of artifacts that tell them how to build a good API, what our API patterns look like. It'll give them artifacts in terms of documenting an API, so we can drive up standards and consistency of how to produce APIs across the organization. So even though digital teams have lots of autonomy in building their services, this is their first port of call, and this gives them the guidelines on how to build those services. They can also search on what APIs are available, and they can do some mock testing. So they can identify if there's 3 or 4 APIs maybe that they're considering. They can think about testing against 3 or 4 and choose the one that's best for them. We have the API owner registered in the exchange, so if they want to have a conversation with the person that owns the API. We also have the performance matrices, so they can see exactly how that API is performing. This is available internally to DWP, lots and lots of rich information. And we can also take an extract of that and share a little bit of that with some of our cross-government API register. Charles Baird is going to do a talk on that straight after this session. So we feed that information and then make it available. Discovery is the key to driving that better use of data, better customer service, more joined up, and certainly for finding and driving standardization within your API economy. We made the decision not to have a central API team, because we were too big an organization. If we were building all of the APIs in one central team, it would be 1,500 people in a single team, which wouldn't work. We work with a number of small, agile, self-organising, multidisciplined teams, usually of around 15, 16 people in each team. So the API exchange is treated as a product and a service in its own right, and it defines all of the standards, best practice, etc. as well. There's a lot of common tooling in there as well, so we do a lot of our common tooling in terms of an automated test pipeline, automated deployment pipeline. We work on the basis of a distributed gateway network, so the teams do have a lot of autonomy on the APIs that they build, and our role is to ensure that we're building them to standards and that people are actually using them. So some of the use cases where we've used these APIs. Right at the start of the pandemic, when we all went into lockdown, we lost all of our staff, so all of our job centres closed. And despite there being a pretty good furlough scheme put in place, there was still in excess of 3 million people claimed universal credit within the first 2 to 3 weeks of us going into national lockdown. Now, the first step in any of those claims is to ask the citizen to call in to a job centre to validate who they are. So we had to do something really quickly that enabled us to process those claims, but still be able to validate who the citizens were to keep our payments safe. And we were able to, in just 2.5 weeks, from core APIs that were available, string together some APIs that offered up a single API for the Universal Credit Service to do a citizen validation check. So we were able to automate that part of the process, which enabled all 3 million of those citizens to be paid within the SLA target, which is 4 weeks. You could imagine if all of our payroll went down and somebody said we weren't being paid at the end of the first month of lockdown. That's really impactful. That's food on the table, as well as rent and mortgage payments, etc. So it was really important that we maintained those payments. So being able to do that, and we've still left that check in place today, and we've been able to reuse that API in other service lines as well. So as other service lines are modernising and removing some of those manual steps from the processes to make it a better customer experience and to make it a better agent experience. And it means that we can then automate some of those processes and really put our staff on some of the value-add citizen-facing services. Some of the services that we provide in DWP, the richest services, are some of the work coach things that we do, some of the Kickstart job schemes that we support, some of the long-term unemployed schemes that we support. That's where we really add value, not through processing claims. So another use case that we had was some of our benefits require medical evidence, and we relied on a lot of paper coming from medical providers. And what we were able to do is convert that paper journey to a digital journey. So again, working with the medical service providers that were providing the medical reports and telling them, well, we can move away from paper now, you can do these digitally, because what they were doing is recording them on a computer, printing them out, sticking them in an envelope and posting them to us. We'd then get them in, scan them, and then route them to the right agent to determine the benefit entitlement. Taking all of that out of the process is not only quicker, but it's removed all of those inefficiencies. And we produced an API that the medical providers subscribe to. They can consume that API and it automatically uploads those medical reports into our systems, creates a prompt for the agent or for a robot if it's a simple decision, and the payment can be made out to the citizen with either light touch, agent interaction, and some straight-through processing. So again, really good for the customer and really good for the agents because, again, they're not working on rekeying, we're not handling post and shoveling post around the patch. The last use case that I'm going to demonstrate is working with another government department. We worked really closely with the NHS on free prescriptions, so we've all gone to the pharmacy with a prescription and the pharmacist asks us to check the box on the back of the form and we just hand it in. They had no means of checking, so it was purely taking it at face value. And then some weeks after the medication had been dispensed and all of the paperwork sent to a central space within the BSA, it was then coordinated, uploaded, and a post-event check would be done usually about 10 to 12 weeks after the medication had been dispensed. And what happens then is a lot of people tick the box that weren't entitled, or even people who paid for their prescriptions that were actually entitled to have it free. So we worked with the NHS really closely on providing a real-time API that enabled us at the point of dispensing the medication to do that check. We started off with a bit of a pilot in the northeast of England, and we've now rolled out across the whole country, including the online pharmacies, not to Scotland because they get their prescriptions free anyway, oddly enough. So we've released that API and it's being used now as citizen ticks that box on the back. The pharmacist records it in the system, and they get that real-time check that says, yes, they're entitled, or no, they're not entitled. And we made that API so it was reusable. So when we were approached fairly recently by the telecoms industry to say they were offering social broadband tariffs to help with the cost of living to specific benefit recipients, and could we provide an API that would enable them to validate that someone was in receipt of benefit? Ta-da! We had an API. We had an API that was absolutely reusable, and it meant that we were really quickly able to respond to that ask from the telecoms industry, who now, if you look on the telecoms websites, you'll be able to see they mostly, certainly most of the big companies, offer that social broadband tariff now for benefit recipients. And it means they can do regular checks, so it's not just a case of they check it once and then you get it forever. It means that they can do that check and they can do it regularly, and the APIs, they're available for them. So the APIs that we have in everyday use, you can see how granular they are on the left-hand side there, check personal details, address lookup, etc. And we're using a lot of these APIs, not just within DWP to join up the journeys within DWP, but also across government. There's an awful lot of interaction in the services cross-government, and it's something that we need to get better at in terms of improving cross-government services for citizens. So when we think about things like free school meals, disability benefits that entitle you to a blue badge, when people go in and out of local authority care homes, there's an interaction between us and other government departments that's really key to ensuring that we continue to meet the citizens' needs based on perhaps changes in their circumstances, or that we can keep, citizens can tell us something once. Our bereavement service is a prime example of that. When you report a death at the registrar, they take all of the information of the person who has died, and then everything happens from there on in. Now, some of it is automated. There's still quite a bit of it paper flowing between departments. But if we can take that Tell Us One service where there's one interaction for the citizen, and then behind the scenes, the government just sorts it all out. And if we can automate that, we just sort it all out and get us Tell Us Once Plus, Tell Us Once Really, then that's going to be a great place, and that's a real aspiration for us over the next couple of years to take what we've done in joining up journeys across DWP and helping to join up those journeys cross-government. And that's just a little example of some of the data shares that we're doing real time with other government departments now to enable them to improve their services to citizens. So our current number of API calls, we've got 200 plus APIs and growing, and we're processing over 25 million API calls every day. That's about 600 million a month and growing. We see a growth of 2 to 3 million every month growing. And when we think about what that offers us and the opportunity of that, it's really exciting for us in DWP. And we'll be talking in the later session about how some of that creating technology for good and being good for society is helping us attract a much bigger and diverse range of people to come and work on some of these big citizen impacting services in government. That was all I was going to say. I think I've just about got it in on time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Perfect timing, exactly 1 minute. Yeah, thank you. So we have time for the question up there. Nice music.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the great presentation. We talked before, I don't know if you remember, Marco from HSBC.
Yes.
And I think we are similar in so many ways in the way we do things. So I had a couple of questions for you. One is, do you have conceptual models to describe what you do as a business that stays stable over time? For especially thinking of the integration with the other intergovernmental departments so that a citizen is a citizen across the board, or not? And if you do, whether that's helping. And then the second question is, what kind of standards do you have in terms of, obviously not the list of them, but is very coarse-grained or fine-grained, and how do you ensure that they are being followed, given your amount of APIs and the traffic? You got, I guess, manual is not an option. So how do you, for example, enforce the alignment of your APIs to standards automatically, and if so, how?
Sure. So in terms of standards, we publish our standards, and we also run regular, what we call API accelerator groups. So if somebody's building a new API, they come into the API accelerator group and they talk to us about what they're building, and we'll cover off the standards and best practice there. We also have some automated test tooling. So within the what we call our packed IO test tool, we'll ensure that they're not delivering breaking changes, etc. We actually work on an API contract first basis as well. So when we're building up the contract on both sides of the API interface, the contracts are templates within the portal. So by building that contract first and agreeing, this is the query that I'm going to send and this is the response that I'm going to give, then building your application around that contract means that you're building in standards and quality right up front. We also have things like our engineering design authority, engineering community practices, where people can come and just collaborate around a new API, but it creates quite a buzz. If we're creating a new API, and the engineering community will buzz around that, and they'll be invited into a sandbox environment and have a bit of a go at it and a bit of a test at it and develop it further as a community. And I think that's really important when you're developing APIs, is to focus on the outcome that you're trying to achieve and to get the community gathered around it. So that's how we manage the standards. Not saying that the odd one hasn't got through that hasn't quite met the standard, but we do our best to catch them all and really build it in right from the beginning. The first question, sorry,
I think it was the unicity of the vision of the citizen across the board, across all the government.
Yeah, the vision of the citizen.
And so how do you work with other entities?
Yeah, so certainly within DWP, we have a good view of a single citizen in one of our monolithic systems. Like most of industry, we've still got some of those legacy systems that gives us a single view of the citizen. We're looking across DWP now at interacting with some of the new technologies that are being built in central government, so things like the Gov account and the single identity that will be exposed to us through an open API. So we will start to use those. It's those things that will start to give us the single view of the citizen cross-government. We've certainly built to have a single view of the citizen cross-DWP, but enable to widen that out. And one of the things, because we touch most households in the UK, opening up our APIs to other government departments is a really key part of that cross-government ecosystem.
Charles will be set up in a few seconds, so we have time for a last question. Yep.
I can shout, it's fine.
Yeah, you can shout loudly then.
Great example on the prescriptions use case in there. I'm assuming in terms of the flow that it's something much earlier on the NHS as opposed to the pharmacist pulling up postman on their phone as an example. But going forward from that, how much control and how much are you collaborating and working with other government departments on like approving use cases and designs of your APIs, or is it much they're there, use it however you want, there's very little like sign-offs there?
It's a really good question.
Can you rephrase the question, because we are recording and also we have online people, so if you can.
Sure. So the question was really around the governing the use of data. Do we just open up the API to everyone, or do we have some processes that assure and approve the use of the API? It's absolutely the latter. So every single data share that we have in government, you're held to, like banking, you're held to a higher account in terms of your data security. So we look at what is the legal basis for sharing this information. We look to things like the Digital Economy Act. We look to broker individual data sharing agreements, and particularly even with other government departments, will create individual memorandum of understanding. And part of the API exchange, for every API that's consumed, we will have details of under which agreement is that consumed, and it's part of the pipeline process to confirm that your API is GDPR compliant and that your user is using it within the data compliant regulations. Every single API and every single user of the API has to go through that process for approval.
Thank you very much, Jacqui. Thank you. That was great. And actually, I worked a lot with the European governments on their API strategy. And yes, this is quite advanced. So congrats for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone.